Hello, and welcome to Culturopolis, the show where I give you all of my thoughts on the latest and greatest this month in culture. In the month of March, we have some spectacular films releasing, including Creed 3, Scream 6, and even John Wick 4. I'll also be delving into the TV show Shrinking, which I've been watching over this month, and I'll also be giving my thoughts on the Arkham series of games, which I've been playing recently. This month, I'm not recording on my PC, so audio quality might not be as good, even then, but still, yeah, without further ado, I hope you enjoy, and this is Culturopolis. Starting off the month of March exceedingly strong with Creed 3, the third installment of the franchise takes Adonis Creed on a more spiritual journey, as his past returns in the form of his childhood friend Damien. After already becoming the world champion and achieving the very height of success, Adonis now steps into the ring to fight the man he once called his brother. Now, I am a big fan of Creed 1 and 2. I'm a big fan of the Rocky movies, and I have to say, this movie was an absolute knockout. There was bold choices made for this. Not only is this movie the first to not feature Sly Stallone as Rocky Balboa, but it also does not have Ryan Coogler under the helm of director. Instead, the star, Michael B. Jordan, makes his directorial debut in this third run as Adonis Creed, and I have to say the direction blew me away. A big headline for the film's release was the inspiration Jordan took from anime such as Dragon Ball Z and Naruto for the fight scenes, and it surprisingly works very well. The visual storytelling on display, even in the very first fight, feels very fresh, but not out of place for the franchise. One thing that they did, which I really liked, was the slow motion close-ups, focusing on Adonis's eyes and then showing you where he was looking and then seeing that play out in the fight, which I thought was very effective. I don't want to spoil it at all, but I especially loved the choreography in the final fight, the stylistic choices made, as well as certain moments and mannerisms from Jonathan Majors specifically, still stick with me now. Speaking of Majors, he's up there as one of my favourite antagonists across the whole Rocky and Creed franchise. His acting is phenomenal, and I did love the brother dynamic that was delivered. Even visually, Adonis and Damien are two sides of the same coin, only difference being one had to take the fall when they were much younger. I will say that there were some plot holes that left me a little confused. For example, Adonis's reaction to Damien's shortcuts in order to get to fight professionally, but it doesn't matter too much because it still needs to culminate in the final brawl at the end, and it does not disappoint. Looking at the box office, the movie has made the most in the worldwide box office compared to the previous two films at 226 million, and I could not be happier to see this sort of growth coming out of the pandemic with a film that took a lot of risks. I was very pleased with this movie and hope Jordan gets the chance to return to Creed as both star and director once again. Right, now we're going to be looking at 65, starring Adam Driver. Now, a lot of what I'm going to say in this synopsis, I wish I wouldn't, but sadly it's already slapped all over the trailers and poster for the film, so I'll just get into it anyway. Adam Driver plays a pilot from an alien world who goes on a 2-year trip across the galaxy in order to pay for his daughter's medical treatment. When hit by an uncharted asteroid cluster in space, he finds himself on an alien planet, only we very quickly are told that it is not in fact an alien planet, but prehistoric Earth, and it's up to Adam Driver to protect the lone survivor of the crash and find a way back home. I was really excited for this movie, because the idea presented in the trailer sounds so promising, but it already delivered red flags at the same time. The fact they so quickly spoiled the fact that their alien planet is in fact millions of years ago on Earth, I feel was a huge misstep. I feel like it could have been a much more effective plot twist for people going in blind, and that would have been great, but the dinosaurs versus sci-fi concept is all over the promotion, and I can understand why. My presumption is because they didn't have faith in the generic-looking sci-fi film, and that it wouldn't have sold well on its own if that was all that was shown in the promotion. Then again, half of the film does just feel like generic sci-fi. Another pretty blatant lie in the promotion, and now after seeing the film, is the tagline, "Future versus Past," which implies that Adam Driver's character is from a future human civilization. However, this just isn't the case for some reason. Instead, they are aliens from a random planet that just so happen to evolve and develop a culture exact to humans. It just became more confusing and left me with more questions than if they'd just done a obscure time travel element that they didn't really need to explain. And then the final product just left me pondering why this alien planet had the exact same verbal codes and curse words and conventions. It would have just made more sense and been less effort, in my opinion, to simply be a human civilization hundreds of years in the future, somehow winding up in prehistoric Earth. Another thing that annoyed me was the fact that Earth felt too much like Earth. Now, hear me out here. Prehistoric Earth practically was an alien world compared to the world that we know, and yet they barely take advantage of that. In fact, there were random establishing shots early on after the crash on Earth of this, you see, storms of tornadoes and water geysers and landscapes that feel sci-fi but are in fact true to what life would have been like millions of years ago. And yet the film doesn't do anything with those territories or terrains. Aside the general plot and annoyance with that, Adam Driver was decent in the film. It's not his best performance, and if we hadn't already had enough of the orphan child and found father figure stories in a single month with The Last of Us coming to an end and then Mandalorian Season 3 starting, this movie features that as well with Ariana Greenblatt's character, who is fine in the film. This was just a pretty decent popcorn flick with some good CGI throughout, but far too forgettable for an idea that could have broken new ground with the right writer and director under it. Now, as a Cineworld Unlimited membership, yes, that is a brag, I was able to go to an early screening of the new Dungeons & Dragons movie, and honestly it was better than I expected, if not without a few problems. The film follows Chris Pine's Edgin, a bard who recruits a band of lovable, if not forgettable, fantasy characters in order to rescue his daughter and stop the evil red wizards. My main issue with Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves is its lack of the core ingredient to an actual campaign of D&D, imagination. In its visuals, fight scenes and basic lore, they've got the fundamentals down with even a few Easter eggs for die-hard fans, but the story feels so been there, done that for a fantasy franchise that holds so much more depth than what is actually being taken advantage of. Instead, what we get is a pretty bare-bones script that feels closer to a C-tier Marvel movie, full of convenience and characters who tell you their primary character trait, which they live by for the rest of the film. And one thing that really bugged me was the inconsistency in accents. It's a small detail, but it's just something that kept bringing me out and taking my immersion away. In the main cast alone, Chris Pine, Michelle Rodriguez, and Sophia Lillis all have American accents, which is fine. You can have a Dungeons & Dragons or fantasy movie with all American accents. That alone doesn't annoy me. But then it's Justice Smith, who you may know from Detective Pikachu, an American actor, putting on this terrible British Lord of the Rings ripped voice that was so inconsistent and just bad throughout. It just didn't work. I will say some of the jokes in the film got a good chuckle from myself and the rest of the audience, and the action was pretty serviceable, though I can't say all too memorable. I think it's best to keep your expectations low for the film like I did, and find yourself coming out pleasantly surprised. Not as terrible as it could have been, but certainly not as great as it had the potential to be. Now we have Scream 6, the sequel to the requel that came out last year. Scream 6 builds more on the relationship between sisters Sam and Tara as a new Ghostface takes Manhattan. In preparation for this movie, I did a binge of the 5 previous Scream movies over the span of a week and had an absolute blast. I'd only ever watched the original Scream beforehand and had a great time with each of its successors. I would really like to make a dedicated video on the whole franchise, but there's already a lot of ideas for videos that I want to focus on first, so we'll get to a Scream video at some point. I have to say, Scream 6 is a lot of fun. The film very much is a direct sequel to 5, of course, so I would recommend watching that if you haven't already. Sam and Tara, as well as Chad and Mindy, create a great set of new protagonists, ones that come close to rivaling the originals from Scream 1. I especially loved the ghost face in this movie. Without spoiling it, of course, I predicted who was behind the mask quite early on, but it was still quite effective despite that, and the final act was a great set piece, featuring plenty of references to what came before. The story and progression characters go on is very nice. What they are building on with Sam, starting off in 5, has more than piqued my interest, and I'm really looking forward to where her character will go in the future. Only issue with this movie, the only issue, is no Sidney Prescott. They didn't have the GOAT! The absence of Neve Campbell for the first time in a Scream movie is such a shame, especially considering how influential she was for the franchise. But the new cast, accompanied by legacy characters Gale Weathers and Kirby Reed from Scream 4, more than make up for it. There's not as much commentary on the horror genre as previous Scream movies, but the progression of characters and new setting of Manhattan still add a fresh sense of life to the film, cementing it as a worthy addition to the franchise. One of my most anticipated films of the month we're talking about now, and that is Pearl, starring Mia Goth. This is a sequel to last year's X, which also had Goth in the leading role, and I think director Ty West has created something even better than X. It is 1918 America, in a familiar, although far more saturated farm, where a young Pearl fantasizes about being a star of the big screen, and she is happy to cut down anyone who stands in the way of her dreams. Pearl was amazing. This has to be my favourite horror movie for some time. Mia Goth gives an incredible performance as Pearl, which is unsettling and disturbing, yet a wonder to see in action. The highlight being a one-take monologue which is close to 10 minutes long, where Pearl breaks down her own character and feelings, and watching it just fills you with so much dread and sadness. It's brilliant. The decision for this film to have Pearl as both protagonist and antagonist was very interesting to watch. This is what makes Pearl superior to X in my opinion, as I far more enjoyed watching this psychological downfall of this character, building up to an explosive third act, all in a very stylistic cinematic fashion. This style is very much served by the cinema of the time period it's set in. The film most of all clearly takes inspiration from The Wizard of Oz, as not only does Pearl have a striking resemblance to Dorothy, but there's even a very special scene with a scarecrow. The film also serves well standalone, so if you haven't seen X, the film doesn't hold any plot devices or callbacks against you, which I always appreciate. But of course there are also little cameos and a few parallels between the two stories. Particularly, I was a big fan of the parallel between Mia Goth's two characters, as Maxine in X was fixated on being a sex symbol, whereas Pearl was more hell-bent on being a star. Both are symbols of the time period and reflections of the industry at the same time, and I really liked it. Also, of course, there were some fantastic kills and action throughout, especially in the final act. This was a very well-rounded and satisfying film to watch. Ty West aims to cap off this series with Maxine, which will be releasing this year, and I cannot wait to see it. The next film we're going to be talking about is Allelujah, Jesus Christ. Based on Alan Bennett's stage play of the same name, the film is a comedy drama which takes place in a hospice called The Beth, which faces being closed after government budget cuts, as we watch all the different roles of both patients, families, and most of all the care workers in this love letter to the NHS. The film stars a very talented cast of British actors, including Jennifer Saunders, David Bradley, Bally Gill, and Dame Judi Dench. For the most part, it's a lovely story, and I enjoyed all the characters featured. The film was very funny, even though I understand I'm not exactly the target demographic. The film mostly caters towards the older crowd, but I still had a lot of fun and even found it very emotional at times. My main issue with this film is the final 30 minutes. There's a certain development that takes place in the plot that feels so out of left field, not only for this genre, but for the very film it exists in. It takes the core message of the film, this love for Britain, its healthcare and all of that, as it ends with a monologue highlighting the importance of the NHS, which is just squandered by the peculiar final act. But if you are looking for some light-hearted comedy with some overall decent writing and emotions to it, Allelujah is a good time, if not spoiled by a somewhat bizarre ending. With James Gunn recently taking charge of the future of DC, we're left with a few final films that were in production before the takeover that are just kind of existing now. And the first of which is Shazam! Fury of the Gods. I really liked the first Shazam movie. It was an entertaining, family-focused superhero movie which felt quite fresh at the time compared to the dark and gritty of the DC at the time. Its sequel does not have the same impact. What was most disappointing was the very small amount of screen time that was given to Asher Angel, who plays the much better half of Billy Batts in my opinion. Zachary Levi is great, especially in the first movie. I really like him in the role, but his performance felt too similar to the first movie's Billy, the naive 14-year-old. But in the second movie, where the younger actor was very clearly not 14, Levi's performance feels a little too forced. The comedy in the movie still hit and was as good as the first movie in my opinion. The Shazam family has a great dynamic throughout, and each member got just enough screen time in my opinion. What I do find funny is the fact that the studio had such little faith that this film would do well in the box office, and spoiler alert, it is not doing well in the box office, but they had such little faith that they featured the climactic cameo of Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman in promotional material for the film, which just ruins the entirety of the film's climax, because you would know going into it that the grand consequences will have no consequence if you have seen Wonder Woman in the trailers. The action in CGI is pretty serviceable. I was a big fan of the designs for the Greek monsters. Reminded me a lot of the Witcher games monsters, which I really love. I'm a big fan of David F. Sandberg's creativity when it comes to creatures, both in this and the first movie. It's one of the highlights of the franchise for me. Yeah, so Shazam! Fury of the Gods, it's a good movie, but it is held back by studio mishaps behind the scenes as DC prepares to clean slate entirely, and the result is a pretty forgettable experience. I do also want to say there's a lot of controversy because Zachary Levi recently went on a live stream on Instagram to defend the movie, which was absolutely wrong to do. You should never go on a live stream to make like an apology or a big statement, because you're gonna slip your words, and he did in this Instagram live. Certain clips were taken out of context and edited so that it would make him seem like he's saying, do not go see John Wick 4, watch Shazam! Fury of the Gods, we are a much better movie, when in fact that's completely not what he said. In fact, he said, we are a much better movie compared to what the press and reviewers have been saying. It's just a mess, and I don't know how he's going to pull himself out of that, but yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because I thought it was pretty funny, the fact that, because, I mean, everyone's just hating on this guy now. Now, Broker was a movie which I sadly was unable to feature in last month's Culturopolis due to the first screening where the aspect ratio and subtitles were cut off, but I was able to go see it again this month, and I'm so glad that I gave it another shot. After a mother leaves her baby outside a Dropbox for unwanted children, the two people running the Dropbox plan to sell the child to a rich family. After finding out about the scam, the mother threatens to tell the police until realising that it isn't strictly malicious, and instead they plan to find a good and proper home for the child to parents who simply cannot get a child through legitimate means. She then assists with finding a proper home for her child, and then goes on an internal journey through the process. I don't have much to say more than what I did in my first impressions of the movie in last month's Culturopolis. Song Kang-ho from Parasite does a great job yet again, supported by a fantastic cast in this very comedic yet real adventure across the country that focuses on found families. I really liked this story. It was very emotional, got a few tears out of me, I won't lie. I really like the music as well. It's a soundtrack that I've listened to even after watching, which is always a good sign. I really like the soundtrack. I believe it is also the same composer who did Parasite, which was also an amazing soundtrack. After watching it to its completion, I'm only left annoyed that I was initially cut off from a beautiful and emotional story such as this one. Capping off the newest movies with the biggest event of the month, John Wick 4. I'm a huge fan of the John Wick franchise, each one somehow getting better and better, and somehow, John Wick 4 is the best of the bunch. Keanu Reeves returns as the Baba Yaga in this epic mix of action and, action. This movie is a full-throttle, non-stop, constantly accelerated joyride, all on Pompeii, and it is Volcano Day. That is not much of a synopsis, but you can go in absolutely blind to this movie and still have a blast. I know from experience. After going to see this with friends who had never seen the previous movies, they still loved it just as much. Now, of course, the biggest thing to talk about with a John Wick movie is the action, and it is better than ever. Director Chad Stahelski has once again elevated the possibilities for fight sequences. I don't understand how he can still keep this franchise so fresh and new. The best action scene, possibly of the franchise, is featured in this movie, and it has to be the top-down one-shot fight where John is armed with the dragon breath. Can't say any more than that, but goddamn, that was amazing. What I loved most about this movie was the introduction of this brand new cast of characters. One thing that's been consistently getting better and better with each movie was the eccentric side characters that are introduced in each of them. I particularly like the almost comedic killer played by Scott Adkins, and the blind assassin Kane, played by the non-blind actor Donnie Yen, who played the other blind guy in Rogue One. Each feel very fleshed out with the possibilities of more and more spin-offs in the franchise. I can't wait for the reins to be taken away from John Wick and onto some of these other characters. The film culminates to bring together the entire franchise with what I think is a very satisfying conclusion. There's been discussion about what will happen to the future of John Wick, but I think no matter what, it'd be good to at least take a break from the character. Keanu Reeves is beyond phenomenal, of course, doing roughly 95% of the stunts in this movie alone. This series owes so much to Reeves, but the way this film ends, the impact of that would be harshly taken away if 3 years from now we just get John Wick 5. Looking to the future, however, there is the series Ballerina starring Ana de Armas, which I believe is still happening, as well as a supposed spin-off starring Rina Sawayama's character in John Wick 4, which I will absolutely be watching. Out of any other movie, go see John Wick 4 whilst it's still in cinemas. It is a contender for one of the best films of the year already in March, and it will absolutely be the best action movie of the year, I assure you. In terms of television this month, I binged through the new Apple TV Plus show Shrinking. This stars Jason Segel, Harrison Ford, and was co-written and co-created by Brett Goldstein, who are all some of my favourite boys in the world, so this show was a slam dunk for me from the get-go. Segel stars as Jimmy, a therapist who is still processing the loss of his wife, struggling with his own mental health, whilst also trying to keep up with the mental health of his patients and loved ones. He decides to take a new angle of his work and become more involved with the lives of his patients. Now, from the get-go, this show tackles with mental health and how we deal with our emotional struggles and how most of the time it's not pretty. Compared to last month's The Sun, which tackled similar themes, this show does it levels beyond. That is thanks to the comedy and realist undertone that is baked within each episode. The blend of laughter and sadness was not only engaging, but it was real and gave each episode more vigour. The cast is tremendous, specifically Segel as the leading man. Every time he pops in and out of the mainstream, he's a delight to behold. He's not new to a comedy series, of course. Anyone who's watched him in How I Met Your Mother as Marshall would know how incredible he is, and he is just as, if not even better, in this series. But of course, the biggest question that came with this show was how in the hell did they get Harrison Ford in this TV comedy? But the even bigger question is, how does he work so well in a comedy? The answer is, he's Harrison Ford. He could turn a Toyota Corolla into a jet if he didn't already own a jet. He is tremendous in this. He still plays the typical sort of gruff, strong, silent type, but the vulnerability that he delivers, especially later on in the show, shook me. And he's also exceedingly funny throughout. So yeah, even if you don't have Apple TV Plus, I honestly think this show is worth it. Even after watching it, I am currently rewatching it again almost immediately after. It was that good. It will have you laughing, crying, and everywhere in between. God, give it another season, I beg. Ending things with retro and recommendations, we just have the one feature in this month of Culturopolis, but we'll be looking at an entire franchise, and that is the Batman Arkham series of games. I love these games. Ever since I was very young and I was introduced to Arkham City on the Xbox 360, I have loved these games. In terms of a synopsis, it's Batman. What else do you need to know? It's Batman. It's good. It's Batman. It's good. Play the games. The gameplay across each entry is all very satisfying. Of course, Arkham Asylum, the first game, can feel a little slow now, but combat, traversal, and even puzzles are all still very satisfying and will keep you engaged for the entirety. The combat revolutionised not only superhero games but also action games, as the martial arts, countering, and combo meter all played crucial to the future of third-person action-adventure games. My only critique when it comes to gameplay is in Arkham Knight, the reliance on tank. I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people say, especially in terms of the open world, but the tank sequences that take over the story just feel ingenuous, if that makes sense. Other than that, the gameplay across the entire franchise is top tier. The stories of all the games are incredible. I believe Arkham Origins, ironically the black sheep of the series, has the best story of all, in my opinion. Everything from the Christmas setting, the way the Batman and Joker meet, the character arc that Bruce goes on, and all the C-tier villains being hired as assassins to kill Batman was a very fun and engaging campaign that felt like it was ripped straight out of the comics. Speaking of the comics, I would say that over any other piece of media, film, TV show, animation, audio drama, anything, these games are the best adaptation of the comics that I have seen. They perfectly capture the characters of the Bat family and his ensemble of nemesises. Anyway, that's all why the interpretations of these characters are the first that come to mind when they come up in conversation. That is also in huge thanks to its cast. Kevin Conroy, who very sadly passed away recently, was tremendously influential to this character. Words cannot express the sheer impact he had, not only on the IP of Batman, but to the thousands, if not millions, of fans across the globe, and he will be deeply missed. His pairing with Mark Hamill as the Joker led to an iconic pairing that persists in our culture ever since, as these two interpretations of the characters are still fondly remembered after 8 years since we last saw them. I highly recommend you play this series of games. I would start in the chronological way, with Origins first, then leading to Rocksteady's trilogy. They're not only some of the most fun open world experiences, but are some of the best superhero media available for you. I love them all dearly. And that is Culturopolis episode 3. Thank you so much for listening. I had a really good time with all the movies, and I'd just like to say I cannot wait for next month's Culturopolis. So many good movies coming out. The Mario movie, Evil Dead Rise, Renfield with Nicolas Cage as Dracula. Just take my money. But yeah, I'd like to thank Ashley Simpson for the music. If you like this episode, I recommend you go watch the others. Please consider liking, commenting, hitting that subscribe button. God, I hate now that I'm actually saying this. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. Bye guys. Oh, nice.